Canada, so now we are international.
So worldwide.
And we're excited about it. So our question for you today is, how is fear affecting your life? Think about it. How is fear, what is your fear, whether it's logical or illogical fear, how is that affecting your life? Well, on episode 53 of the Queer Money podcast, and consequently episode 53 of the Queer Money follow-up series, we talked about successful LGBT living with our former mentor, Jay Allen. And those of you who have been following us along on the Queer Money podcast or on the Queer Money podcast follow-up series, you'll know Jay Allen from our very first episode of Queer Money podcast, where we talked about the risks and rewards of coming out at work. Jay Allen is the former senior VP of HR at Charles Schwab. And at the time that he was in that position, before Tim Cook came along and stole the title from him, he was the highest ranking out executive in America for a period of time. And David and I were fortunate enough to work with him far below and many levels below him. But he kind of became a mentor of ours and has always been an inspiration for us. Simply because one, he's quite successful, and two, he's a very down to earth, pragmatic, and friendly man. I mean, the first time that he and I actually ever talked, he invited me to him and his husband's wedding, and we had barely known each other. So he's just a very genuine and nice guy. And you might remember him from a quote from the first episode where he said, "I am not a victim." And that is a quote that has got a lot of positive feedback from our listeners and has resonated with David and me. Jay grew up, kind of came to his own as a gay man in the 80s in San Francisco. So he was in the heart of it during the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And it was a tough time to come out, and a tough time to come out and try to think that you're going to have a successful career in America. And he just decided that despite his background, despite any limiting beliefs that he had, despite the homophobia that he also experienced, as many of us do, he chose decisively that while I may have been a victim at some point, or been victimized at some point, I am not going to be a victim.
Yeah. What I think was very interesting is in this conversation, not only the first time we had Jay on the podcast, but this one specifically where it was just the three of us talking, it is very clear that Jay has defined himself. He has not allowed the events in his life to define him. He talked about his childhood, and we had this conversation about the three of us, right?
We had very similar experiences.
Right.
That was interesting.
Right. Growing up in very deeply religious, all three of us were raised in very deeply religious families, and the fear of what it would be like to come out. I personally lost all my family. He has a very accepting, his mother, and John's parents are somewhere closer to mine, but they're somewhat accepting. And I think that we all kind of came into the world of being gay and coming out with this fear and trepidation of what our past experiences in life how they might limit us. And that's why we wanted to have Jay back on the show, was because we think that there's a real strong need for queer folks to get rid of this victim mentality that we are victims of our circumstances. We're not victims of our circumstances. Oftentimes, we're trapped by the way we believe our circumstances define us.
Right, and we can break free from that. And so Jay had to do that himself to be able to become a leader in the corporate world. He worked at IBM, AT&T, and Charles Schwab, and he had to break free from that mentality for his own success. But then he was the senior vice president of human resources at Charles Schwab. So he had thousands of people working under him. And he told us on this particular episode, he said, "I think being completely who you are and authentically who you are is the only way you can be your best and actually perform at your job." And so he's seen this not only in himself, but in others, that if, as he said on, I think, episode 1 of the podcast, he said, I need you to bring your full self to work. Right. And there are so many people, upwards of 75% of individuals go to work hiding some aspect of themselves. That's not just LGBTQ community, that's all people included. And so if you're working actively, you're expending energy to actively hide parts of yourself at work, then you can't give 100%. And so that's not what your employer is paying you for. And not only are you not, is your employer not paying you for that, but you're not setting yourself up for as much success as you could avail yourself if you were able to be out and open. And a lot of times that being confined or in hiding ourselves comes from here. Granted, it's based on experiences that we've had in the past, but a lot of it comes out of fear, and we're afraid to sort of break out of that mold. And what Jay is tried to get his employees to do, and what we're trying to get our community to do, is to sort of break free from that fear, because it's not the best way to serve us, even though it might be rational and logical based on our experience in the past. It's not helping us in the future.
And I think it applies to other aspects of our lives, not just our careers, right? Being authentic when we're with our friends, being authentic when we're with our family, all of that helps us gain confidence in who we are. We often talk about the toxic masculinity in our community as something that many gay men hide behind. I think there's a kind of a very strong overt femininity in some men as well. They use that as a facade to protect people from really seeing them, because it makes people laugh, or they get some level of attention that they are seeking, but it's not really being authentic to themselves. Or maybe we use other facades like clothing, or we had Dylan Gay of the Sober Gay podcast on our podcast the first week of this year, and he was talking about how he would use alcohol and then his joking and his behavior as a way of getting attention back when he was so desperately seeking attention from others. And I think that oftentimes we can get kind of conditioned that this is how I'm going to get acceptance. This is how I'm going to get the
love and approval I so yearn for.
Exactly. And so being authentic, oftentimes we hide behind things because of our fear. Right? Because we're fearful of people actually seeing who we are.
Yeah, and Dylan talked about how he used, and he's not an anomaly. You hear this quite often, especially for recovering addicts, is that they use alcohol as sort of it was like their cape, right? They could put this cape on, and then they could be their most boisterous, out and open self, the person that they actually wanted to be, but they had they have this crutch of alcohol, drugs, or whatever that they need to sort of help make that happen. I kind of want to go back to this point though. John and I and Jay, we all talked about our upbringing and the childhoods that we have. And we know we all have different childhoods, right? We're all faced with different things in our lives. But oftentimes what ends up happening is during those years, as we grow up, we know we're different. Right? Mm-hmm. And when we know we're different, we start to form ideas about who we are compared to everyone else. And that can sometimes create these limiting beliefs that we have. We struggle with the fact that our families are talking about how queer people are bad. Our churches are talking about how queer people are bad. Our politicians are talking about how queer people are bad. And maybe even it's not necessarily overt. Sometimes it's just the jokes or the side comments that are made that hold us all into this whole idea of I'm not a good enough person. Right.
And when we believe that we're not a good enough person, or that we're less than, really what is happening is we're coming from a place of fear. We are coming from a place of, I want to be just like everyone else. I want to be as good as everyone else, but I'm scared that I'm not, because we have not been able to basically prove to ourselves, not to anyone else, prove to ourselves that we're just as good as everyone else. And I think that's part of the reason why Jay's statement in the first episode was so important to us, that we actually put it into the reel, the intro and exit reel of the podcast for quite a long time, where he said, I'm not a victim. I'm not going to stick around and let somebody treat me like that. And he was specifically talking about his work environment, but I think that we all need to remember that we are not victims. We allow the circumstances to continually. And it's interesting that when you listen to someone talk about the therapy sessions that therapists have with an individual who has experienced true victimization, one specifically, I've listened to therapists talk about this, specifically rape, and how some women have allowed the victim, because of their victimization of themselves, have allowed that individual to continually over and over and over and over again abuse them. And that one of the reasons why they need to stop feeling the victim, living the victim, being the victim, is because they need to take that power back, right? Well, we all need to do that too. One of the quotes that we say we have repeated a number of times here as well as on the podcast was from Brian Thompson, where he talked about how uncertainty creates fear, and then fear creates an action. We kind of want to hook on that last part there. Fear creates an action. Fear can hold us back as queer individuals, right? That's why we want to share with you these tips on how you can overcome fear, because it's really important for us to not continue to victimize ourselves long after the victimizing action has actually happened.
Yeah, we've got to take back the power.
Right, exactly.
So we've got 4 steps that we've used in our own life, and we know that several others have used to help take back that power. And because a lot of that taking back the power, as David was alluding to, starts in the subconscious. It starts with us here. So how do we take back that power with ourselves and our thoughts first, so that we can actually take back our power out in the world? And the first step is to simply, especially if you're in the moment and you're dealing with something, take a deep breath.
Right.
Just simply take a deep breath. Breathe in and breathe out slowly. If you need to, close your eyes. Just take a moment, because you're not going to make, and I found this in my own life, you're not going to make a rational response, rational decision if you're worked up, if you're upset.
Right.
You sort of want to dial things down a bit. Take a breath. Then step number 2 is start to look at what you've already accomplished. I think so many of us don't give ourselves the credit that we're due. We're our own biggest critic, and we're so prone to sort of tear ourselves down. And I distinctively remember when David and I decided that we were going to build Debt Free Guys. We knew that we would have to leave Charles Schwab, and I was the first one to go. And I had a phone call with Jay, just give him the heads up that I was leaving, and he kind of asked how I felt about leaving, and I said I'm actually really scared. I've never actually done anything like this before. Trying to build our own business and do our own thing is just not what I was conditioned to do. I have no examples of it in my life. I've never actually done it myself, and so I was kind of scared. And Jay said to me, he said, "Look back on your life and think: have you ever failed so miserably at anything that you were without a roof over your head, or that you weren't able to put food on the table?" And no, I actually never had that experience, and I was fortunate enough to never have that experience. And he said, you've made it to this point in your life, pretty much having succeeded in every aspect of your life. What's to think that you're not going to be able to continue to do that, even though you're doing something slightly different, or something slightly outside the norm for yourself? And I would argue that most of us can use that example of having, we have so much successes in our own lives, whether it's, even if it's just reaching adulthood and staying a nice person despite everything that you might have experienced in your childhood. That alone is a success story. So, and I'm sure that we all have a myriad examples of big and little successes that we've had. So the second step is to look back at all you've already accomplished or overcome.
Yeah. Third is to start to write a new script about yourself. right? A lot of times we get to this point in our lives where we have fear, we've had certain victimizing situations in our life, and we just continue to think about those and play those scenarios over and over and over again. This is something that I have a really bad habit with, and I think this is because of the internal discussion I had with myself growing up as a kid and the circumstances I was faced with bullies at school and teachers who bullied me at school and my parents and their attitude towards me growing up, knowing that I think they knew that I was different and I just acted different. So I had this internal conversation. I just kept on writing this over and over again. And I would go through these scenarios that I know would, looking back, never would ever happen, but I always would think about those. And that's what turned me into kind of being a victim myself. But we need to write the new script about ourselves. If we want to get over the fears that we have, if we want to be successful, if we want to take the next step in our lives, we need to start actually thinking that way ourselves. And there's a couple of ways to do that. We can start to journal about the way we are actually thinking, which gives you a look into the way you actually think about yourself, because sometimes it's surprising. I think it's Mel Robbins, a motivational speaker, who says if people could actually hear the things that we say about ourselves, they would lock us away, right? Because this person is fucking crazy. If you were saying the things about that you say about yourself about someone else, you were verbalizing that, you'd get hauled off, right? Yeah, exactly. The second is to meditate, to actually try to slow your mind down and to think about or focus on some things that are actually good, positive, and that are motivating for you. And then the last part of that is affirmations, putting into your subconscious, repeating over and over and over again. We had a fabulous conversation with Evolve Benton on episode 245 of the Queer Money podcast. And they were on talking about how they have used affirmations and are using affirmations with the people that they work with to basically rewrite the script that we have had in our lives to be the kind of person we truly want to be.
And then the overall fourth step there is to then just do it scared, right? No matter your biggest, baddest hopes and dreams, sometimes they're fucking scary.
Yes.
But don't hold yourself back. Don't let fear dominate the outcome. We have been another mentor of ours who we're actually currently working with is Ruth Sukup, and she's gone through her own challenges. But she's actually written a book and did a TED Talk called "Do It Scared." And ultimately, we all get to that point, no matter all the work you do, how much you're working on your subconscious, no matter how much preparation you've made, when it's finally time to actually take the step, make that action, it's scary. I mean, I think it was on a recent podcast that we talked about, when David and I gave a talk for Prudential Financial. It was our first public speaking event. And I remember them hooking us up with microphones and getting us ready for us to go on stage. And I remember thinking, if I was given the option to take the red pill and go up on the stage and talk, or take the blue pill and go and die, that probably shouldn't. That's a scenario I should not have been presented at that time, because I might have chosen the latter half of that option because I was so scared. But I eventually did it. And maybe for the first 15, 20 minutes, it was a fog. I blanked out. I'm not sure what I said. But we didn't get kicked off stage. And I remember the latter half of that conversation. It was fun and enjoyable. And now when we speak in public, we love it. Now, I'm not sure if other people love it, but we're having a good time. And so if it was only because I just did it scared that we were able to break through that. And so the fourth step there is we want to encourage you to just do it scared. Do whatever you have to do your ultimate dream, be your biggest, baddest self, and make it happen.
Yeah. One of the things that we also talked about, this was something that we asked Jay what the progress or the direction that he saw the community moving in, and things that we should be thinking about. And this was an interesting one that I don't think that we were tuned into that much, maybe because of the fact that we didn't work with as many LGBT organizations as he did. At his level, there were literally almost every single big organization in America, LGBT organization, was trying to get into his pockets, right? Or into the pockets of Charles Schwab, since he was such a senior leader at Charles Schwab. And what he said was, what he thought was an unfortunate thing that he saw happening is that a lot of LGBT organizations and even LGBT-friendly politicians or LGBT politicians were starting to be ruled by fear and using that fear to pressure the community. And that fear is not a good thing that we should be acting on. We should be acting on something other than fear. And I think that it is important for us to remember, if we're a part of an organization or working with an organization like that, that really what we should be focusing on is the opportunity of what it's going to be like if we achieve what it is we want to achieve, rather than saying we don't want it to be like this. We should actually be saying this is what we really want it to be like. There is another way to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And to be clear, when we interviewed Jay the second time for episode 53, it was shortly after Trump became president. So there was, the country was in a whole different dynamic, and the LGBTQ community was having different experiences and concerns at that time. But how that relates to what we've been just talking about is that it's easy for us to sort of kind of gravitate to that fear, and to a certain extent there may be some logic to it, but if that's all we're hearing, it kind of almost reinforces everything that we had to deal with in grade school and high school, even as adults. So we got to be cautious about not getting so hung up on the fear and getting indoctrinated by the fear and letting that fear rule our life, because as Brian Thompson talked about, that fear then is going to create an action, then we're not going to actually be our biggest, baddest, bestest self. Right. That's exactly what we want to try to help everybody do.
Well, and one of the things that Jay pointed out, and I think we've talked about this too, is that fear can kind of separate people. It pushes us into dividing ourselves into an us and them, right? An example of this is I was talking to a gay man who lives in LA, and he was basically referring to the rest of the country as flyover states, right? And I was thinking to myself, it's very interesting. You're a gay man living in LA. You're surrounded by lots and lots of gay people. One of the things you're forgetting here is you're just saying that all the rest of us queer people who live in the middle of the country, you're discounting us. And please don't do that, right? Don't separate us into an us and them. The more we separate ourselves into an us and them, the more we push people away from understanding who we are and accepting who we are and actually hearing our stories to realize that we are human beings. And we need to do the same thing with them too, right? We need to be open to listening to their stories and understanding them as well, and seeing them as humans. Let's stop the fear separation that's going on.
Yeah, communication is a two-way street for sure. So please let us know in the comment section if you think fear is ruling your life, and if so, how is it ruling your life and how is it affecting your life? We would love to have that discussion. It's a deep discussion that we think our community must have. And then again, thank you for joining us for another Queer Money follow-up. We enjoy doing these, so hopefully you're getting value out of it. Here's your Queer Money follow-up takeaway from this particular episode. Please get your free copy of the 5 building blocks of a happy gay life at debtfreeguys.com/happy, or you can click on the link further down in the show notes. And then join us tomorrow for episode 54 of the Queer Money follow-up series, where we cover episode 54 of the Queer Money podcast. Interesting how that happens, where we talk about the 1 million reasons why gay couples, same-sex couples, should get married. Yeah. We're going to list all 1 million of them in that particular episode too. So it's going to be a long one. Nope. Bring your popcorn. Wear your pajamas. It's going to be a good one. Yeah. And then lastly, but not leastly, as always, please give this video a thumbs up. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, and please set notifications on this channel so you get notifications when we drop videos or when we go live, because we would love to have you in on the conversation.
And if you stuck around to the very end, it's now martini time for David and John. That's why there's a martini. There are 2 martini glasses and a shaker.
Is that shaker full?
We've been thinking about this for our treat for the weekend, so we are going to go have a martini.
We actually haven't had a martini in the condo since before the new year.
Yes, it's
because we did dry January. So, all right, this is more information than you need to know. So we'll let you go.
Thanks again.
Have
a good evening.
Bye-bye.